who is responsible for much of the property that we're talking about, and some of the private property that may become park property in the future, is also vital to the success of this project, and his role in it has been extremely helpful. So with that, the only other thank you that I want to share is I do want to extend my gratitude to both Mayor Curry and the City Council. Mayor Curry's focus on downtown has really made initiatives like this and all of the various work that the Downtown Investment Authority is doing possible. It wouldn't have happened had we not had a downtown focus. And we're a huge consolidated city county. And I know part of Daryl's challenge is focusing on all the parks throughout the whole county. So the idea that we can put a little light specifically on downtown and look at how this riverfront can be a unique destination for everybody throughout the county and in adjacent areas is, I think, a really important role that DIA can serve and that the mayor and the city council have facilitated in these projects that we've done. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mari and her team. And I just want to say thank you. We look forward to implementing the recommendations that you're going to hear about tonight.
Over there. So thank you all. Thank you, Lori. But you know, part of me just wants to repeat those thanks, because when we were given the opportunity to engage in this work, it was perfect. We focus on placemaking, we focus on equity, the idea of being able to facilitate a process where we look at the riverfront in downtown, which I really think of as Duval County's riverfront. You know, it is, sure, the St. Johns River runs through a lot of Duval County, but a lot of it is, you know, private homes, right? And country clubs. The downtown public spaces have the potential to be everybody's riverfront. And so this created an opportunity for us to reach out to the whole community, which, you know, I've been here 2 years, and this process has been an incredible learning process. So I'm grateful for that opportunity, but I'm really grateful for the incredible public-private partnership that has made this possible, from Lori to Daryl to, you know, other members of the Curry administration. They've been incredibly open to this partnership, and then the civic groups that have made this possible, whether it is Riverfront Parks Now, Mosh, the Y, the Comer, WJCT. All of you have made it possible for us to bring together all the little pieces, what I occasionally call the Tetris blocks, that make up the presentation that you will be seeing here today. And I'm grateful too to the city council members who we have briefed starting in January, and we rebriefed them. And then we said, will you invite us to some of your community meetings? And some of them agreed. Councilwoman Morgan and Council member Dennis, for example, invited us to their town halls, and others. Again, they've been incredibly helpful for us in reaching everybody. And we are excited to do this event because, notwithstanding the fact that, you know, we are nearing completion, we're not quite at the end, we are nearing completion. We wanted to show all of this to you to get your input, because this is a marathon. This is by no means a sprint. The great plans that we came up with, they're going to take commitment and political will and funding and the right governance mechanisms to make happen. And we can't do it alone. We depend heavily on citizens like you to say, yes, we want this. Yes, this will be a great thing for our city. This will be a great thing for our county. I'm reminded of, I don't know if there's anyone from Duval County Public Schools here, but we ran into, they've been on some of our briefing calls, and they came up to me one day and said, you know, the amazing thing would be all these people go to like Clay County or St. John's or Nassau because they think Duval County schools are not as good as schools in those counties. We want you to make a riverfront that is so good that they come to Duval County for field trips. When you have done that, we will have succeeded. So let's go and do that. All right. Oh, actually, let me take before I hand it over to David, because I'm actually supposed to introduce all of these. Or DVDL, David Vandalia over there. WXY, our design partner, David and Claire. And by the way, Maria is also with DVDL. James Lima Partners, governance and funding strategy partner. Yuxiang is here. Groundwork Jacksonville, I saw Gloria. Yes, thank you. Our on-the-ground partner to help us reach all the different communities. Riverfront Parks Now, Nancy, thank you. You helped us put together the benchmark studies. So all of these people have helped us put all this together, but don't blame them for any of it. We should take the responsibility for it.
A very good evening. I'm David Vandalia, and people seem to wonder what's the accent. It's Dutch, to get it out of the way. Good to be here, and it's actually funny because I realized I hadn't worn a jacket and dress shoes in a few months, so good excuse. What we'll do tonight is talk you through the overview here. We have been working on an activation plan very closely with Mari and her wonderful team, Lori and Sandra, and it's been really exciting to work through all of that, also with many of you here in the room. What we'll show first is a quick project overview, the research that we did in these last months included. And at that point, we'll pause briefly 10, 15 minutes or so for public comments. There's note cards being passed around. You saw those downstairs. If you didn't get a chance to fill those out, don't be shy. You can just go up to the mic. And we'll do another round of public comments at the end of the meeting. The second part of the process, or the second part of the meeting today, is fully focused on the activation plan that we have been working on, ranging from the programs to the designs to the funding. It's always an important aspect to include. So excited to go through that with all of you. And perhaps while we get going, one important thing is, like, you are living in a city, right? And sometimes I wonder, like, why do I live in a city? And I think for me, the most important thing is actually people, not so much the buildings, but just the notion of, like, seeing each other, especially in weird times like we're in now, and being able to learn something from each other, have a good time together. People is what makes cities great. So the plan that you will be seeing today is largely focused on people, how to activate the riverfront that you have with more activities, more people, different age groups, different community groups, quite exciting. So let's jump in. So the boundaries for the project are interesting. We largely use the DIA boundaries, so the full riverfront, north and south sides, within those DIA boundaries, a very, very large zone, as most of you know, and I doubt that any of you track through them on a day-to-day basis, but tons of potential. The process that we went through, we actually started a little earlier than you see here, but the public side of the process started in the spring. And we ran through a lot of meetings. Many of you here in the room were involved. We did research in the background, worked on a space plan that I will show you a little bit on in a minute for the shipyards. And then throughout, there were also these public meetings. We built several stakeholder groups. When you're working on public processes, especially public processes for public spaces, it's so important, right, to bring great minds of the city together, of different ages, different professional backgrounds, different backgrounds generally. So what you see here is 3 groups, and let's click through it. Several of you are in the room here today. Fantastic to work with all of you, and thank you for your time. With these groups, we saw you probably 3-4 times, and I must say this was a really fun group, by the way. The Next Gen group, always good because you're definitely getting some spicy comments from this group. That was very helpful. activation coalition. So this group was largely focused on the actual programs, and this group was so big that we had to spread them out over several slides. Good. In the process, there were two pieces of early work that we developed that I'm not going into detail on tonight, but are important to mention. What we realized is that there is not a solid set of either design or even social principles that you can use to look at your public spaces. And between WXY and ourselves and all the stakeholder inputs, we developed two sets of materials, a series of principles that hopefully will not only get used for the riverfront planning in the coming years, but also very importantly for many types of public space planning, really. I won't run you through these, it will take actually the whole session, but it's 5 on the social side, each coming with a whole list of like requirements of like how you want to look at these spaces. And we have similar sets on the design side. All of these and a lot of other interesting material that was developed throughout the process live on the Jessie duPont Fund's website. So they can all be downloaded from there. Another thing that we won't go into detail on, but many of you have seen, is the plan that was developed for the shipyards. Important to highlight here because it's such an interesting part of your city, tons of potential there. As you all know, you've probably seen some of this press, but WXY, with our input in this case, developed this really interesting, and let's look at it on the next slide, this really interesting space plan, I would say. It's a test fit more than anything else. This is not to say like this has to look exactly like this, but we wanted to see, like, if you're starting to look at the shipyards as a place of real public space, green space, culture in it, obviously, with interesting entities like Marsh and the Naval Museum, how could it be playing out? So looking quite interesting, and also that is to be seen further on the website. So Maria will tell you a little bit about the public input. And because it has been so interesting between the survey and all the stakeholder sessions, so much that we learned. And then from there, we'll move into some of the other research and the first round of public comments.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, David. I'm Maria Budtz, and I work with David at DVDL. Just want to say thank you so much for being here. And as you've heard already a few times tonight, we've had conversations with many of you in this room and around the city, really. And I just want to give a really big thanks to Groundwork, who has run a lot of this process for us. So they've been immensely helpful in the public space survey that we developed and collected. And then they have run public programs, including really fun boat and walking tours, envisioning what the future of the river could be. And they've also ran community meetings out in a lot of their urban core neighborhoods and other neighborhoods surrounding downtown. We've ran public meetings like tonight throughout the process and met with our stakeholders. And this is just on a very high level, some of the things that we've heard, but that we've heard kind of again and again throughout this input. What we've heard is that Jaxsons want a riverfront that's for all, and that they want ample park and public space. And they want the riverfront to be a place where community is created and can come together. And people want and deserve high quality design on the riverfront and in their downtown. They want an active riverfront, or Jaxsons want an active riverfront, and a focus on accessibility. And Jaxsons really want to celebrate the amazing cultures and history of the city. And food is something that comes up a lot when you ask people what they want. And a variety of options, which also include a variety of price points, has definitely been a topic. And then people are really excited about the idea of doing even more educational things on the river in terms of ecology and bringing schools there. And then people want to just connect with nature and be on the water and provide a lot more opportunities for those kind of interactions. And we've developed a whole kind of report where we're summarizing all that we've heard throughout the public input. And so we really want you guys to dive into that. It's publicly available. So tonight we'll just show a few of the highlights from what has come up. What we're really hearing is that the river is the star of the show here. Jaxsons are very, really enjoy just going to the river and enjoying the views, and would like the riverfront to be a place where people would come from all over the city and from all neighborhoods to be able to do that. And they want to go to the river and just bike and walk and read a book and just look at the beautiful views. But today we see that 34% say that they never go to the river to enjoy green space, and 20% say they rarely do. So of course, there are many ways we can improve that. And then Jaxsons want a fun and functional riverfront. So obviously we've talked a lot about what kind of fun things could be happening on the riverfront. Stuff that come up is theaters and again, food, dog parks, festivals, fishing is something that has come up a lot. And people also want to be able to go there with their kids and their grandparents and do things together socially. But as we also know, Jackson's population is growing and it's becoming increasingly diverse, also a bigger proportion of an aging population, which will increasingly put more pressure on the city to provide services. And we asked in our public space survey, how often do you go downtown for services like medical, doctor, those kind of things? And 63% said that they never go downtown for services. And we don't think that the riverfront should become a service provider for all sorts of services in the city necessarily, but we do think it could become kind of a navigator or a resource, a place for resources. And so what has also been mentioned a few times, as we've been talking to people throughout this process, obviously we've heard a lot of things that people are proud of and should be proud of in the city, but often other waterfront cities, of course, have come up and their success stories. And so in the background, as David said, we've been working with the amazing crew at Riverfront Parks now, who has already done a lot of this type of research before. So it's kind of an obvious partner for us. But we've looked at riverfront cities, 20 to be exact, across the country, and a few examples from around the world. We've looked at parameters like design and landscaping and programming and activities. And some of the cases were chosen because of their comparison in terms of size or climate, or the history of having a working waterfront. But others because of their innovative partnerships or programming that we think the city could learn from. So again, we have a big report that you can all dive into to be published later this week. So just to show, give you a glimpse of what we've been looking at. So for design and landscaping, we looked to Toronto, where they've really reclaimed the streets and improved infrastructure for bikers and pedestrians. And also some interesting design that really shows multi-purpose functions, like these wave decks, but also are where you get really nice views of the city, and also amphitheater seating. We've looked at Austin, that has an amazing boardwalk that kind of meanders all the way along the water. It has interesting experiences of art throughout. We looked at places like Louisville in Kentucky, and how they're using their great lawn, not only to actually absorb floodwater, but also for really large community gatherings and free concerts in the summer. In Brooklyn, they have an annual photo festival where the river and the city skyline really provides a really beautiful backdrop and draws people to the river. And then Ecology and flood protection is also something that, of course, has been a big part of the research. Places like Nashville, we've looked at, that really has transformed from wastelands into public to vibrant spaces. And on this picture, you see kind of a tiered seating that doubles as a flood wall, which is just one of many resiliency efforts in the city. And the beautiful kind of boardwalk that meanders through 13 acres of restored wetlands in Little Rock in Arkansas. So again, just a few highlights of a lot of the behind the scenes kind of work that we've been working on.
All right, economics. All right, so my name is Yuxiang. My company JLPD is a national consulting firm working on economic and policy issues across the country. So in all regions of the United States, we see a paradigm shift that's very obvious, which is about economic development and business growth, which is that the companies, they are now chasing where the talents are, instead of where college graduates and job seekers going to where there are companies. This is especially evident in terms of technology, innovation economy, and the creative sectors, which are very important for the future economic growth. Just look at Texas for Tesla and also New York for Amazon a few years ago. So which begs the question, what does the talent want? Like, where do people really want to go? So from national surveys and research, we know young people and also highly educated workforce, they increasingly make their life decisions and locational choices based on quality of life factors, including the downtown amenities, restaurants, green spaces, museums, and also existence of other young people and young families that can make their social life better. So in other words, in today's economy, capital follows talent, talent follows place, which really makes investing in the experience of place the best and also the most prudent business strategy for any city. All right, thank you. So as we see across the country, many cities have already invested in their public spaces to try to capitalize on the economic benefits, and they do come into shape. Enter exhibits A, B, and C, where we see in Indianapolis, the real estate value next to the cultural trail increased by 148% in 6 years. In Pittsburgh, after the city invested $130 million in their river park, there's $2.6 billion of new investment that's coming into the surrounding of the park. And the business, I mean, the economic benefit is not only for businesses and developers, it's also for individuals and citizens. As we see in Denver, according to the research, a nice outdoor program make people healthier. Collectively, that help people save $65 million in medical costs. Also in Chattanooga, as we see, the now pretty famous Riverfront experience was pretty instrumental to rebrand the city as the center of innovation in Tennessee. And also that was a major factor to contribute to the attraction of Volkswagen new plants in the city. But also with all the economic dividends, we have to also think about how we can make the benefit really for all people. So in the report that we produce, we also provide examples of where the very intentional linkage between public realm improvement and planning with workforce training, small business opportunities, arts and culture, and also affordable development to really make sure that the benefits of improvement are for all people. So if Jacksonville wants to make any investment in the public realm, now is the time. Because today, Jacksonville has an advantage in the global competition for talent. As we see from the data, the growth of population in Jacksonville is one of the fastest in the country. However, we have to think one step ahead, because in order to translate this momentum into long-lasting advantages for Jacksonville, we also need to think about the amount of young people, the amount of highly educated workforce, and also the technological content for the companies. And this is where we see, based on the comparison between Jacksonville and some of our neighboring cities and regions, there are gaps to close. It's not very wide, but we do have to close them so that we can really compete for more investment and talent in the future that will benefit all of us. If Jacksonville, again, wants to make any investment in public realm to really attract more talent, we believe downtown Waterfront is one of the most logical choices for location for two reasons. Okay, I'm gonna wait for Jake to take the picture. And there you go. Number one, the waterfront is already in the center of activities and in the center of everything. As we see based on economic data, if you just draw a map, that's 5 minutes from the water, so about a quarter mile on both sides. That very small geography has a business density that's 25 times higher than the rest of the city. And if you look at the downtown area overall, it's also a very small geography because Jacksonville is a very large city. That 0.3% of land area in downtown accounts for 13% of all the economic output for the city. So think about it, like this really is an area, another place that has an outsized influence and contribution to the tax revenue and everything that the city enjoys. So we think activating the waterfront will be able to directly benefit the highest concentration of those that will generate economic returns to any investment. So let's do that. Second reason, as we also know, even though we have all the density of jobs and companies, we also have available land for future development around the river in the downtown. And as we see earlier, successful activation of a public realm is not in isolation with development. Like development and public space, they do not replace each other or compete with each other. They should complement each other and try to create an experience that really benefits everyone. So when we know that Jacksonville has available land that can potentially be developed in the future, activating the waterfront is a very smart move, because in all places that we work on in the country, public realm is like infrastructure that make a location more desirable and also make the market better for investment and development in the future. So investing in the waterfront will be a crucial strategy for Jacksonville to really capitalize on the potential for any future development that will generate more jobs and also tax bases for the city. So here we are in 2021, where many big cities are losing population because of COVID and the remote work. This really is an opportunity for Jacksonville to really catch up and also capitalize on its already very high quality of life and low cost of living. As we see on the data, since last year, Jacksonville actually gained more new arrivals than any other similar cities. So this is really good news for Jacksonville to begin to act. And Zoom, sign out. It's okay, the password is not showing, so.
You never know. This would be the one time. Well, as it turns out, the
I think.
continues.
All right, we've been staring at Jacksonville, Salt Lake City, Sacramento for a while, but now, like we know, like there's momentum going on, and what's really needed. Somehow this clicking is not working, so if you can help me click. Okay, thank you. So let's act now, because we really need to now translate the current momentum into long-lasting economic advantage in attracting talent and investment, and we believe the riverfront is the key, because all of our competitor cities, they can invest in education, healthcare, business investment, like incentives, but they do not have what we have here, which is St. John's River. So let's make that our greatest asset and act and to do it now. Amen.
So we're going to take some time for public comments, but I just realized looking at the presentation, it's kind of funny to sit to wonderful people next to me here who haven't had a chance to say anything yet in this first section. So I'm, so I'm going to put you on the spot, Claire, for a minute, because you've been with us in most of these meetings. And so all the stakeholder meetings, interesting sessions, like looking at it over all these months, what are some of the biggest things that you took away?
Always the hard questions, David. You know, in listening, we've been meeting with Yuxiang, we've been seeing this data. We see the 3,000 something surveys come in, attended Gloria's sessions. What's really, seeing what Jake's doing in downtown, what's really took me aback when Yuxiang laid out really what's at stake for, young entrepreneurs here in Jacksonville, for people who are moving their companies here, for families, is the moment. Actually, that's really what hit me, is that in many plans, you expect them to take 15 years, you plan on this length. I'm really struck by the fact, and we're a public space firm, and we are working in many locations across the country. Many of them seem to have more time, but I would say Jacksonville doesn't. It's like the time is now. It really strikes me that there is a need for action at this point, to not squander a moment that seems to be where, I hate to use the perfect storm in Jacksonville, right? But where a lot of factors, some sites didn't get moved on, some things left, like all of those factors, the national economy right now, the mobility of people, and yet the fact that every time we come in, I hear over and over again, I meet a lot of people who not only grew up here, but are still here and like being here. That's the kind of assets when they come together, that if you wait a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, there's this sense of don't lose the moment. And I think Yuxiang's data really spelled that out.
Very good. So there's a welcome for Claire. David, briefly for you, you've been talking a lot about upland connections and not only focusing on the riverfront. While we're thinking through this activation scheme, perhaps like 5 words on that.
No, I mean, it's a critical part of our thinking, and something that we've been thinking kind of deeply about as part of our overall process, which is, how is it that the riverfront and the goals that we've established there and the design iterations and moves that we're starting to think about along the water can actually begin to kind of go inland, reach out to neighborhoods, create direct, safe connections to those places, and really become an extension of the larger kind of pedestrian public space network. One of the most inspirational projects for me in the work that we do around public space is the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. For anyone who's seen it, and it was part of our benchmark, it's amazing because they were able to really just take on-street space that wasn't necessarily used to its full capacity and create a full connected landscape. There's a huge amount that can be done just using pavement and asphalt and simple near-term and long-term treatments. And I think that the connectivity to the neighborhoods and from the neighborhoods to the water is kind of a critical part of how this plan will come into being and be successful.
Very good. And sorry for putting you both on the spot, but it just felt weird. Public comments. Lori, I think you've been collecting cards, and we'll take 2 minutes for every comment. We have a clock going here, as you see. And for the comments that require an immediate, oh, I see one here. Very good. So, Susan?
My camera's on.
And then with comments that require a quick answer, we'll do, and other comments may require really long answers, and then we'll talk over drinks later.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessie. I was born here in Jacksonville, but I moved away about 10, 12 years ago. to live in the Chicago, Indiana area. And I ended up going off to Indiana University. That's where I went and got my bachelor's in healthcare management and policy. And after graduating, I moved back here during the pandemic. So that data that you were sharing from LinkedIn, I actually saw that data and it really struck me. It was very interesting because, you know, I was like, I'm one of those people that moved back to Jacksonville during the middle of the pandemic. But I say all that to say that I really appreciate like these type of meetings where you all are gathering community input. One of my favorite things about the Riverfront that I've been going to the Riverfront recently was basically the Corkscrew Park. I don't know how many of you all have been there before, but I go there probably like every night, going to run up the hill like that. I love that. And I really think that a lot of young people like the physical activity and to incorporate that into like the views, and it really brings out a lot of people. And I think more things like that are needed for the Riverfront. Yeah, so I really think that if we continue to do these type of meetings and continue to take action, like the action is like that, it's urgent. Like we need to get going because a lot of young people, they look for vibrancy. A lot of people, young people that I know, they go to Orlando just, you know, just for that vibrancy. And that vibrancy is missing in downtown. I think we all know that. That's why we're all here. But continuing to that public and private investment is so essential. And I think this administration, the current administration, is doing a great job with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan, I think you wanted to jump in.
I'm Susan Caven. I'm president of Scenic Jacksonville and part of the Riverfront Parks Now. And Riverfront Parks Now has been going around talking to people about what they see, what they would want for downtown. And our idea is to have a connection between the landing property all the way to Metropolitan Park, a connection, parks, restaurants, and all. So we talk to people all the time. I just this week talked to a big group, and I was telling them what would bring you down. It's a group in Mandarin, and what would bring you downtown? And I said, would more apartment buildings bring you downtown? God, no. Well, how about activated parks and kids parks? And they said, yes, absolutely. And why? And then everyone is saying, but so why aren't we doing it? We own the land, it's all public land. What's stopping us? So that's a question I'm asking you. What's stopping us from making parks all along our north bank of our river?
I think the answer is going to be the segue after the next comments to the second part of the meeting in which we'll show the plan. Lori. Brian, you're on. Go for it.
Is that for me, Brian, or someone else?
It's for you. Great.
Okay. Yeah, I have a couple of. I want to congratulate you on the clarity and power of your vision, and the depth of the work that you have done so far, and the inclusive group that you've brought together to help with this. My wife Shirley and I have been in Jacksonville for 26 years, and my great-grandfather lived here for a while in the 1800s, and so I've got some background here and some passion for the city. It's our hometown now. The city has a history of grand visions that in the implementation don't work out quite as expected, particularly around improving the racial climate in the city. So I have a couple of questions. First of all, how do you plan to ensure that as property values rise, that African Americans and other people of color who live in the north side and neighboring areas aren't priced out? That's a history of many of the cities that you benchmarked. They've found that gentrification happens, and unless the projects are tied to, not isolated just along the riverfront, but tied to the neighboring the development of the neighboring communities, then things like that can't happen. And winds up that African Americans get priced out of the area and wind up being pushed out. And second is, I'm wondering what your plan is for making sure that there's inclusion of African Americans and other people of color in the actual implementation. And that is, do you plan to create a set-aside program or something similar to that to make sure that there are African Americans included in the development and the construction and all the contracting, both the hard and soft contracting that will go along with this, so that it's a totally inclusive process along the way, and that your value of equity is manifest throughout the process. I have a question. How many people of color are involved as heads of your institutional partners? And how many people of color are involved in DVDL and WXY and JLP&D at the leadership level, if not as CEOs of those organizations? And I can't tell exactly, but it looks like all of the people who are presenting today are white, and I may be wrong because I'm not there. But it would be useful to have inclusive. I know that you included folks of color in the process, but it would be, I think, important moving forward to have the public face of what you're doing more inclusive than it appears to be, at least right now. So again, to congratulate you and to celebrate what you're doing, and thank you.
Thank you.
And to keep it honest. Thank you.
Brian, that was timed perfectly at the 2 minutes, so that was good. To answer some of your questions, because there were a lot of those in there. First of all, like looking at the activation plan that we'll present in the next part of the meeting, the setup is to develop the programs and develop committees for the programs that are representing the full community of Jacksonville. Black and brown communities, communities living in other parts of the city, and so on. So not a top-down process, but a process in which events and activation gets collectively developed. There's always a fear of gentrification, and it will be very important to think through like how development gets developed, obviously. The activation plan that we're looking at here is looking at human energy. So not so much at built energy, but we'll show that in a minute. And to get back to your point about our firms, I cannot speak for the other firms. But if I'm able to grow my firm, that will definitely be a serious focus. So it's not only on your mind, it's also on mine for sure. So thank you for that. Let's see.
Hi, my name is Dara. I'm a resident of Riverside. I've been in Jacksonville about 6 months. I just moved here from Tallahassee, actually, and I'm an urban and regional planner for my background. One thing that I've noticed, I do bike pretty often from where I live in Riverside, and I bike down. I've noticed that places like the Hyatt Regency have no bike amenities. There's no bike racks. Already currently, there are people who use the Riverfront a lot for biking. It's not there. Another thing I'd like to point out is the fact that Bay Street, Union Street, State Street are huge dividing corridors in downtown. They are impenetrable. They're not fun to walk along. They're not fun to walk near. And there's really limited space for pedestrians on the sidewalks in downtown in general. I would love to see more bike share brought. I know that there's a really great scooter program. I personally think it's underutilized, and there would be really great pilot projects, especially for getting to stadium games that are not currently being done. So I think there's a lot of parking. There's a lot of car-oriented mobility in downtown. I think the time is definitely now, especially if you want to retain young people who want to stay here. A lot of people may come here and say, oh, this is great for 6 months, for a year. And then they're like, oh, well, I'd rather go to Denver, Orlando, or Tampa. But I think Jacksonville has an amazing amount of potential, and being more kind of transparent, reaching out to the public more, and really focusing on downtown transportation, making it more people-oriented, and especially improving transit and access to the neighboring communities for sure. Thank you.
This is David's favorite topic.
Sure, I'll take this one. Yeah, I mean, I think when we go to other cities that are, you know, the Denvers, even the Tampas at this point, a kind of feeling of seamlessness as a pedestrian and a cyclist is a precursor to success. There are a number of things that we have seen and heard of that are imminent in Jacksonville, which is really encouraging, including extensions to the Riverwalk that are planned, connections over the Fuller Warren Bridge, which will be an amazing asset to the city, a cycle track that's going to come through downtown, and all of that is great. But realistically, it's still not going to get people to that feeling that they feel safe on the streets and sidewalks, that they feel safe from traffic, that there's that sense of a continuous, lively street wall that you expect in a city of this size. So I think that the answer to that and the ways that we've been starting to think about the plan are really twofold. One is the infrastructure itself has to be there, and it has to be better, and it has to be sized not for today, but for a city that's even larger and even more vibrant. The second is that there has to be a strategy around retail and development that can also create enough critical mass of activity on the street that people actually want to walk and want to bike places. And I think that oftentimes, even at the advocacy level, we don't always think of those things in tandem. And it's really critical in a downtown that realistically does have a lot of holes that are parking lots, or a lot of retail spaces or older office buildings that don't open up onto the city and open up onto the street. And so all of those ingredients are going to be critical, both in activating in the near term, but also in terms of the long-term infrastructure build out.
Thank you. And we have one more question for this section, and then we'll take more questions at the end. We have Yanira Cardona of Yaya Productions on Zoom.
Hello, everyone. So I own a production company, and I am proud and honored to be partnered with James Weldon Johnson Park this year to activate the park as much as we can. This past weekend, we just threw the first ever 2-day Hispanic festival. We had over 5,000 people attend both days, and it was so amazing. So for someone that puts on events for the city, I'm happy that you guys are developing that area, but I am looking to make sure that you guys keep that area active. Jacksonville is a cultural city. We have Hispanics here. Hispanics is 11% of Jacksonville, is the fastest growing demographics. We have a huge Filipino community, and it's just growing and going. We have a huge Bosnian community. So we have to create events that attract them to come here to our city. I'm happy about that you guys are developing the land, but we also have to think about how we could keep our locals happy and keep coming to downtown. I live in San Marco. I'm always in the downtown area. I work with the Jessie DuPont Center and moving the margins with Shawana Brooks and putting on events there. So we're constantly trying to activate the city as much as we can, but people like myself, we need help from the city. We need help from other nonprofits, from DVI to partner with us so we could continue building these activities and putting on these events for the city. This past weekend, I had people come from Georgia. We had people come from Alabama to Jacksonville for the festival. So people are coming to Jacksonville, but we have to keep the city active. We have a great example is Orlando. Downtown Orlando has Lake Eola. Every Sunday, they have a market there with live music every single Sunday. That's something that we should be doing in the Riverfront. And not just that, I'm excited you guys are putting things, but don't put another restaurant, don't give me another brewery, give me something to experience. Give me a Wet Willie, give me a sugar factory, give me something that when I have family and friends that come visit me, I could take them to this experience. Give me a Senor Frogs, give me something in the downtown area, a rooftop bar. Because there's nowhere in the lake, in the river to be able to sit down or bring my family right now to enjoy a nice meal or our beautiful sunsets or say hello to the dolphins that come up and say hi to us. So my thing is, What are you guys planning to do to work with companies like myself to help this, to keep that area active?
Janira, love your comments and thank you for jumping in. This is really a good segue to start talking about the activation plan. So let's do that. Thank you for joining. And there will be a second set of public comments towards the end of the meeting, which can really focus in on the activation plan. And also, if you don't feel like speaking up in the actual meeting, we'll be outside, of course, afterwards. So the activation plan is focused not so much on like a complete rethink or redesign of the riverfront. There could be all types of things for that in the future, but really thinking about like what could it be to bring more energy and people to the riverfront. And my clicker doesn't work, I see. Here we go. So the question is, can the riverfront become the central spine that brings Jacksonville together? And this goes back to many of the points that we saw in the early research. And I think perhaps this one quote here all the way on the right is the key one. You're a city of so many different neighborhoods, right? But the riverfront could become Jacksonville's neighborhood for everybody. There's so much potential. So thinking through a riverfront that is about people first and about obviously connecting with nature, being on that riverfront. And that also means that it becomes a giant opportunity to think about what is that ecological context that you're in. For instance, Marsh could be a really interesting partner here, thinking through their new site and so on. And then this goes back to the earlier points made. The riverfront will be key not to only think through economic opportunities for long-term residents as well as for potential new residents, but also to think through like what is the health and happiness that could be generated for everybody in the city in the coming decades. And this will be great to think through, right? Health is something that we all need much more of. And thinking through health in the context of public space will be something that is increasingly important for plans like this. You had a very active riverfront over the decades, much less active now. And the question is, could you become active again, but focused on people and not so much on product? And what does that take? Maria mentioned a few of these things already, but of course, there's tons of things people would like to do on the riverfront. Sometimes expected things, really great things, ranging from Janeria back in the room. Ranging from fishing and walking and biking, but also a lot of people have been asking for, could I come to the riverfront to do things on my own, or with one or two friends or so? Could you put a clicker back on? There we go. And also quite important in many of the conversations that we've been having is like, could we set up for unexpected interactions in Jacksonville on that riverfront? True interesting programs that are not always just fun, but also really functional. So in terms of the activation plan highlights, and we'll be issuing the plan in the coming weeks, we're looking at 5 key elements. So first, public and green space, then of course, exercise and sports, arts and culture, then there's a small piece for commercial and retail, and then quite importantly, looking at community services and how could you give those a space on that riverfront. Each of these we've been sparsing out into many, many different options that I won't talk you through today, but we've been working through it. And basically, the question is, how could you set up for those weird interactions, people bumping into each other unexpectedly, learning something from each other? That often will mean that things need to be programmed side by side. So not to say that these need to be happening on the river per se, but what would happen if you put the pet adoption days next to chess on the river or an open air band practice? So many interesting things could happen. or a roller disco next to swimming lessons, next to the Tai Chi sunrise classes, or a bike repair shop surrounded by ecology classes and dance classes. So much opportunity, right? It could be really interesting and fun. So not to dwell on those, but Maria has developed a sheet now that is like probably a few hundred of these lines of different programs. This will become a framework for the different stakeholders here to start working with in the coming years. Of course, if you have so many different programs and program framework opportunities, it also becomes important to bring some order in it or some logic to it. And two ways that we're looking to do that is through 1-2-year themes. So this could be ways to bring different programs together and tie them together in things that could be presented quite easily. The themes could range from very simple things like bridges and routes to much more complicated things. But routes, for instance, I think would be so interesting because you could be talking about the ecological roots of this big ecological system that you're a part of here. You could be talking about social roots, and especially some of the complex racial histories in the city and so on. So really potentially interesting narratives there that could be brought into these conversations. Another way to organize programs could be by thinking around program series organized by the day. What we've been hearing is that many people say like, yeah, there's things happening on the river and it's always pretty cool, but I don't quite understand what is when and why and how. So what would happen if you would say like, oh, Mondays, whatever the day of the year you come for that Monday, there's always a bit of focus on health and wellness. Or Tuesdays could be game nights. And I'm not saying they have to be these nights, right? But just to give a sense of like, there could be a logic to these days. And then what we've been working through is quite interesting, thinking through like, could it be, like, how do we start testing this besides all the conversations? And I won't talk you through these because we will be here at midnight, I feel. But like, for instance, if you would have Irene, who's a mother with 2 kids living in Avondale, she may want to come for sunset yoga, scavenger hunt, and some Hogan's Creek kayaking eventually. Or Jack, who's a senior citizen in Cathedral District. You may want to come for the Riverfront chess competitions, outdoor exercise classes, and the history salons. So many different opportunities. And then Markia is a teenager and she's still living with her parents in Eastside. She may want to go swimming, dancing, or she may need a resume building workshop, which I think many of us would love to see happening. But anyway, there's so many different opportunities for things that could be happening on the riverfront. One thing, and this goes back to the early stakeholder slides that we were showing, and the comment that I made earlier to Bryant was like, it's very important that this is not a framework that is getting executed top down. The best program frameworks are partnerships with community organizations, with nonprofits, with community representatives. And this needs to happen on many levels, from the actual being in the events, the running of the events, but also the conceptualizing. So it will be interesting to see how can we set this up. So what we're going to do is shift over to some design thinking, and I'm not going to dwell on these renderings, but because Claire is going to help us think through all of this. But to get into what could be an activation toolkit looking like. So what could be the physical manifestation of these programs? Of course, an activity or program could be taking place literally on a carpet that you roll out, but it could also be much more fun. Like Claire and David have lots of good ideas for that. Claire.
Thanks, David. I have to, oh, right. Get off the title slide here. So, you know, in the course of working with all of you, having community meetings, we introduced, when we were all talking about the shipyards, the word space plan, you know, what things fit where. And, you know, David's used a couple of times now, activation toolkit. So I'm just going to like break that down a little bit. In a lot of ways, it's very hard for, you know, many of the people who are on the call, who are producers running programs, for all of you entities, to actually run if you wanted to run half those programs David described, even on 2 or 3 days repeatedly in different places, how would you do that? And so we felt it was really important when hearing all these ideas and seeing the surveys. It is supposed, yeah, it's on, right? You guys can hear me. To kind of figure out what is, is it a hammer, some nails, a screwdriver? Like, what are the basic set of tools or ingredients to make a cake that, in fact, are not dictating to people, but inspire people to come up with even more ideas than the ones David showed, but also that are taking some of the burden off having to set up, pay for things like all the time. So really the idea is that if you want the software of vibrancy, dynamism, really exciting Jacksonville, then one of the ways to do it, to support a program like this, is in fact to have a couple of schemes, which David will go into, for using this particular toolkit. So we divided this toolkit, and into a number of kind of things they have to do. So under the we call it walk, but it's really the river walk, like those continuity elements. And so we went through whether it was storytelling or shade structures, or just hanging out, reading a book by yourself and looking at a lighting installation. All of these describe elements you've seen, in other places, but in effect should all be available along the Riverwalk. The next category is, what could be called like signs, but we really think there's a deeper meaning, which is, how do you have cues that you're welcome there, that in fact there's actually a choice, you could choose A or B, and that really relates to maybe even having places that are an information station that have some shade, have some like they have more as a way to make a choice that, oh yeah, meet me there or turn right at, and therefore they could be kind of exciting. They could be great art commissions also. And banners get into that, signs get into that. Then you get into things that you may have seen, we've seen, food trucks and kiosks and other things, but we call them mobile units. So the idea is that they should be designed specifically for Jacksonville, and they should do a lot more than many things you see, again, to inspire creativity. And you can kind of see our list there, right? From and what, from markets to everything else. And then I just want to describe pockets. And again, this is a name for making more room, like pockets of your coat, you get a little bit more room. Like there's a lot of narrow spaces. There's spaces where there's a fence, a lawn. We're talking about a strategy for kind of making more room along the path that allows you to people watch, but also do something. And then finally, the bigger piece, which hopefully will really inspire the producers in Jacksonville, which is the idea of a hub. Something not as giant, but big enough to do a real event to attract people in all categories, and something where the demountable or structure inspires people and is really like something that could be repeated. All right. And so I just want to quickly go through these since I talked through them. And again, the mobile unit can do a lot of different things. We showed 2 examples, a project that we have in Brooklyn, so you can tell when it's open, when it's closed, it makes a lot of shade. It also provides, it can be re-graphic designed for different artists at different times and different season. In Venezuela also, really, again, a lot of these are really open, closed things, and they make spaces and shade. They're also great at night. So here we are. And, just clipping through these really quickly, right? You can see how if these can be truly supercharged a bit, they could really provide a lot of different, especially for kids. I really love the soft seating part. And I'd say that works inside or outside. And also who does, even in this day and age, a puppet theater is beyond compelling, but this could be a lot of things. I think you could even use this to do, podcasts out of, who knows, anything. So ping pong, gallery opening. We know what you guys in Jacksonville is at, or even in the evenings. Why not? DJ booth, dance party. And so, in terms of a day in the life, you can see, and this is the hub illustrated here. It's really about we're hoping the toolkit will actually allow the 24-hour programming that the lists imply, and really, and when we say all, Riverfront for all, that means all not everyone wants the same thing. Amazingly, but true. And so these are some of the inspiration for the hubs also, which is, based on all of the photographs of shipbuilding and industry, that kind of tensile, demountable, but really those structures that were meant for storage originally, but in this case, reinterpret them for kind of energy, the energy, storing people's energy. And again, we're talking about this toolkit being the most flexible thing possible, but identifiable as Jacksonville and really part of something that can be very changeable. And I think I'm going to pass this on to David. Well, which David is always?
I will start and then we're tag teaming between Davids. So in terms of implementation strategies, there's so many ways that this could go, right? But just to give two options in terms of rollout. Imagine that the yellow line is your full riverfront. We all know that the yellow line is actually much longer and has two sides, but to get it on my slide, this was helpful. So think of the first option as a concentrated activation option. So we would take one strip of the riverfront and actually get all these toolkits and a very robust program of activities ranging from big programs to small programs for individuals, for groups, and so on, going in this one particular strip. The other option could be to say like, oh, we're actually taking this across the full riverfront and only starting to roll certain of the design elements out and certain of the programs, but are doing that in a way that is completely, even along that riverfront. So David, what does it look like?
Great, thanks, David. So, when we're thinking about the sort of first option where we're really looking at one specific stretch, think of Brooklyn, think of South Bank, or even portions of downtown, the goal here would really be to create a kind of critical mass of activities from our toolkit that could create a sense that there was a kind of real place that had emerged there. And Brooklyn is an exciting example of this for many reasons, but one of the main ones is that there's a lot of existing infrastructure that's not activated today that exists already. So you have a lot of inactive lawns, you have a lot of businesses that kind of turn their backs to the riverfront today, but that space is built, that infrastructure is there, and there's a huge opportunity to kind of transform that into something that can be really enhanced using an activation toolkit. And obviously, South Bank is another great example of a place where that infrastructure exists, but it doesn't quite have the software. It doesn't have the sort of daily, weekly, annual rhythms that activate it and bring it to life to really bring it to its full effect. It's worth noting, and Yuxiang mentioned this earlier, that there are also a lot of spaces that are city-owned that don't have development on them today and that have a lot of potential to be activated in the near term. One of my favorite projects that I refer to all the time from our home base in New York was DeKalb Market, where they basically put out a small market of shipping containers and small vendors on a site that 3 years later ended up developing. That developer decided to change their footprint to include a market as a result of that near-term activation. And so we see this kind of concentrated approach as something that's really a stepping stone to the longer-term strategy.
Yeah, so in terms of program, so for the concentrated version, and this would be a first phase of that, is like in an ideal scenario, would get 1 to 5 programs a day going, which would get you to say 500 programs annually. So lots of different opportunities there, ranging from food and education to all types of culture and so on. Of course, when you start rolling this out in different places and get further into development, this could get much more active beyond that.
So I also want to talk a little bit about the second option. And one of the kind of draws that really we think about when we think about the second option, which is the dispersed activation strategy, is that you're really able to look at the entire riverfront as a whole and think about that activation as something that can actually take in all of the different neighborhoods and all of the different places that we want to bring together. Now, the way that this could happen could be phased in a variety of different ways, but it may be by first focusing on walks, then focusing on queues, focusing on mobile units after that, and sort of phasing in the activation over time, and eventually actually bringing out pockets and hubs over a number of years. And so you can see here a series of kind of tentative locations of where some of those elements might go. Our goal in this scenario would be to achieve a kind of critical mass of elements that people really recognize as public, as active, and as part of a new way of thinking about a cohesive Jacksonville riverfront. And over time, those elements would cohere into a kind of integrated whole that people really understand as part of a new and evolving vision of the riverfront that's happening in parallel to a lot of ongoing capital reconstruction efforts, as well as larger kind of revisioning efforts on places like the shipyards and in downtown. And over time, all of those sites would eventually kind of be part of this new connected, cohesive Jacksonville riverfront that has that kind of software, that kind of DNA that sustains it alongside the capital enhancements that can really make this a competitive and world-class riverfront.
So in terms of programs, you would start rolling those out in the different locations simultaneously. So this does mean, of course, that you're getting to a large number of programs very quickly, but could be really exciting. I'm keeping that short.
It's worth noting that as we've gone through this process, we've also been thinking critically about what the budgeting, what the kind of overall breakdown of these different items is, to make sure that what we're doing is not only implementable and scalable, but also cost effective. I want to now just turn a little bit to talk through some of the initial activation maps and go into a little bit more depth on sort of our vision that was briefly presented through some of the renderings. As part of our work, we've really been going in depth into the kind of potential activation where the different mobile units, the hubs, the pockets, the pathway improvements, the landscaping improvements, the shade structures, where all of that goes in these sort of detailed sections of the riverfront. And as part of that, and this is just kind of one example of one of those sort of overall fun strategy maps, we've really been working to sort of figure out what we can do with some of the spaces that are there today, what we sort of foresee as some of the potential spaces that could be there tomorrow, and then how we can sort of adapt the toolkit and the software that we're creating into a kind of implementable near-term and long-term plan. Oh, can't change. So this is just one stretch of the riverfront that we see today. This is an area in Brooklyn where there's kind of an existing retention pond, a kind of fairly narrow pathway, albeit some really nice physical attributes, a fairly, a fairly strong architectural presence, buildings that are full, that are tenanted, and a nice kind of sloping edge. And if you go to the next slide, okay, actually this works again. This is one kind of iteration of our vision for what that could become. And I'll just kind of walk you through a few of the different elements that are included in this rendering. And they really do draw from the toolkit that we've developed. It includes improvements to the paths, whether that be sort of temporary activations like gates and lighting installations, whether that be new types of movable seating that really can kind of allow people to use the existing lawn spaces that are there in a more public way. One of the things that we're envisioning as part of this particular scene is the kind of activation of the space through that kind of Roots Festival that David was talking about, an exhibition that we're even seeing as a kind of Faces of Jacksonville. And so here, the sort of tensile structure or hub that we've proposed is really spanning the existing retention pond in Geffen Park and reimagined as a kind of cultural hub for exhibitions, play, food, and culture. And you can see just on the right that there's also a kind of mobile unit, one of these kind of consistent touchstones that are included in the drawing, something that we see as really critical to there being a kind of regular sense of knowing that you're on the Jacksonville Riverfront and knowing that there's reliable programming and activation in those spaces. And this is a second kind of place that we thought was a really good illustration of how the activation toolkit could kind of be rolled out. The South Bank rendering, it's actually interesting. When we were going through the process of talking to Jake about some of the ways in which the riverfront could be improved, he mentioned that he had done an event out here. And I thought that for a space that relatively doesn't have a ton of stuff on it in terms of physical infrastructure, the fact that it was able to be activated, that it was sort of this little pocket for activity, we saw as having a huge amount of potential. And so in the kind of near term, using the toolkit, we think that there's a potential to bring out some additional shade structures, think about the kind of seating and programming that could really call attention to the space and bring some life to the space. And then even potentially bring some of the services that David and Maria have been talking about directly to the waterfront, whether that be services around health, access to fresh food, additional planting and gardening, or even just sort of a regular rhythm of running clubs, cycling clubs, and exercise. And so this is sort of one of the ways in which we see some of those toolkit elements, the sort of software of the riverfront, really beginning to activate the kind of existing physical spaces that are there to create a sense of consistency and a sense of rhythm to the riverfront as a whole. And I think I'll pass to you, Shai.
Thank you. So I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited looking at those renderings. So let's talk about how we should implement those economics again. So based on our national research, we really believe it takes public-private partnership to implement this ambitious plan. Public-private partnership in park management and also open space, public realm governance doesn't mean privatization. It also does not mean that the government will have no role. Instead, government will have a crucial role in coordinating and also giving clarification and also contributing to any kind of support that it can. But then the private and the nonprofit sector will need to play a role that's beyond incidental. They will need to play a bigger role in terms of programming, governance, management, to really make sure that the open space, the public realm, it's going to be programmed according to the ambitious plan that the public and the community develop together. And we believe public-private partnership in public realm management is beneficial for 4 key reasons. One is that it's efficient. It allows the city to reduce risk while providing the nice benefits for many people who can enjoy. And also it unlocks the funding potential because private and nonprofit sector can receive donations and also fund other funding sources that the government just cannot. And also by tapping into very specialized expertise and staff resources to do programming, the programming and also the quality of the activation will also be enhanced. It will be more entrepreneurial and creative, and that's ultimately benefiting everyone who can enjoy the public realm in the future. So in our report, we do provide more thinking in terms of the roadmap for the stakeholders to develop a public-private model for park management. So we will have, so what we're doing right now is part of developing a shared vision that everyone can agree as the guiding principles for the future development. And also in the middle, we have more detailed understanding of how the public and private entities need to reach agreements, how do they formalize and codify their collaboration. And also on the right, very importantly, how can we think about governance structures that really make the decision-making as inclusive and equitable as possible, so all the different voices, all the different interests, not only in downtown, but also across the city, can be represented in the process. And also we will have a evaluation matrix so that we can evaluate the vision against, we can evaluate the implementation against the original vision. In the report, we do have more studies and also examples to show how they're done. So as we mentioned earlier, the public-private model is preferred. We think everyone should consider that because of its funding potential. So as we work across the country for a large, ambitious projects like this, it's important to be able to really leverage the ambition and also leverage the comprehensiveness of potential impacts that we talk about here for funding sources from all different potential revenue streams. And based on our analysis of existing funding landscape, including talking to many of you one-on-one in our previous work, we believe it is possible to leverage public and private funding over time. And specifically, the public and private will play different roles where any initial public commitment is aimed at leveraging future private and also diversified funding sources, because nothing brings out success like initial success. So if we can concentrate on the initial few years of efforts of activating to demonstrate the feasibility, to demonstrate the benefits for all people, then it is possible that nonprofits and also private sector will be more willing to be part of this, to provide not only funding for the initial activation, but also potentially for the future operations and programming. In our report, we provide more detail by really looking at the different sources from the government side and also from the non-government side. Specifically, we investigated many different sources in the private side, including real estate value capture. As mentioned earlier, if the properties are going to be sold at a higher price, if there can be more new development, the value of those can potentially be captured so that they can really be used to not only fund activation, but also equity-driven and also affordability-related efforts that we want to keep to make the waterfront really accessible to all. And also on the private donation side, it's very important to think about corporate sponsorships, philanthropy, and also individual memberships, just to see what the potentials are and how can we have a business plan that can really get ahead of the game and think about the long-term operational opportunity. And earlier, as we talked about food and beverage concessions, all of those can potentially be the earned income sources that can also support operations over the long run. So just a few more examples just to see how these different non-governmental sources are used in different places, including in Jacksonville, as we see that for the Riverside Arts Market, that's providing 75% of the operating revenue for the organization that's running this show. And in Minneapolis, this is a different scale. So the entire city park system relies on commissions and rentals at 23% of the non-property tax revenue to run their parks. On the private side, as we see in Orlando, they were really smart in accessing national network of corporate donors through the National Recreation and Park Association. So their donations brokered by this national association contributed to 38% of the total capital budget to upgrade the park. In Jacksonville, we have the zoo. So this demonstrates the power of the individual memberships if there can be a demonstrated success and also value to their contribution. In the zoo, membership contributed 11% of their operating revenue. Finally, in the Millennial Park in Chicago, so again, a relatively more high-end example, but again, this demonstrates the power of a very well-crafted fundraising strategy with the capital campaign, where the campaign established an endowment that provided 42% of operating revenue down the line. And finally, talking about real estate value capture, there are many different ways of making sure that the real estate community contributed to the public realm. On the left, this is a larger scale in Philadelphia, where a very large downtown area is assessed to provide funding for public amenities. And in this case, assessment of 1,500 properties contribute to 87% of the budget running the public realm improvements. On the right-hand side, a different example, a smaller geography in Boston, where only the properties next to the Greenway is assessed. But again, they contributed 19% of the operating revenue for the Conservancy. So there are many different ways of thinking about this process, and this deserves more thinking. And finally, federal and state grants are very important. As we see, one of the strengths of this plan is that it's so comprehensive. It touches upon so many layers of civic life. Those should really be leveraged to apply for funding from not only the Parks Department, but also the Economic Development Administration, National Endowments for the Arts. All of those provide capital and also in some extent are non-capital funding sources that should be leveraged and also should be actively, aggressively pursued by Jacksonville, because there are lots of potential in the national government that can potentially be helpful for funding our activation plan. So what does this all mean? This really means that we need to continue to convene public and private stakeholders to talk about the plan, to think about the approach, but also to dedicate staff and resources to pursue those different funding, including writing the grants, including develop a business plan, including all of that will really translate the ideas into reality. But also more importantly, it's very important to think about how we can plug into national and regional levels of networks so that we can so that we are looking beyond what exists already in Jacksonville. In Myrtle Beach, which is not the biggest city in the country for sure, but they are looking beyond their own limits, and they work with people with expertise to access grants from national and regional foundations so that they can advance their equitable development agenda. So again, thinking about how we can look beyond the locality and really develop the right resource to activate, to access all of those resources will be one of the key steps for our next phase of implementation. So for our city, Jacksonville, making the riverfront better is totally worthy of it, because it not only improves the quality of life for the existing residents, but it also attracts new talent and new investment that will only increase the size of the economic pie that can be shared by all. So let's act on this.
I should first of all applaud you for sticking it out with us for so long, because we got so enthusiastic that this was a little long. Really appreciate your time. We would like to spend a little bit of time with public comments. I see a few here up front. So
David, we have some folks who put in requests to speak
amazing.
As well.
Yes. So where do you want to start, Lori?
I'd like to start with the folks who
Go for
put
it.
in requests, if you don't mind. Sorry for the others. And we've gotten some great questions and comments through Zoom, and we're cataloging all those and we'll be responding in writing. For those of you who put in questions, you will be hearing from us. We have Roy Brown and Alan Bliss, who have both requested to speak.
Bitte Abend, wie geht's?
Good evening.
Yes. Ik should can see, wie heißen Sie?
No, I'm, that's German, but I'm Dutch.
Oh, I thought you, excuse me, when you said Dutch, I said, no, good.
But my
Mr.
German
Schwartz
is
sitting
okay,
in the
but-
corner, I thought when I try my Dutch out, he doesn't speak in the German. Yeah. But ik should can see,
We
wie
just
heißen
switch
Sie?
languages.
Yeah.
But in Dutch, it's pronounced David.
David, yes, I've also almost caused an international incident because of my Dutch.
It's actually funny because it's usually why I say it, because everybody thinks I'm German.
Yeah. Well, I thought I was trying to listen to the dialect, but I didn't get the Bavarian type Dutch. However, excuse me, my name is Roy Brown, and I'm born and raised here in Jacksonville. I'm a descendant of those that had come here, principally from Georgia and South Carolina. My history denotes the Gullah Geechee and also the Yamashaw Indians that once they were forced out of the territories of Carolina, here in the Florida, they called them as an admixture, Seminole that being of my grandfather. And of course, I'm of a, like many blacks in this country. My grandfather was Lord Proprietor from England, one of the Bellingers that had owned it, the shipyard down there. Now it has a lot of contaminants on it. And my question is, I did the data. I worked with Barry, with the city, and with Groundworks Jaxsons volunteered, and we did the environmental studies on the water quality. And what we found was a large concentration of E. coli. With that being said, and the city has this growth potential, but at the same time, we have an issue with the water quality. That being one thing. Of course, to mitigate it could cost a lot of money, I'm sure. The other thing, though, which is most important to me and most dear to me, is the poor man in this town. If you can ride anywhere in the downtown core city and you see people sleeping on the sidewalks and of such. And I spoke to Mr. Musa. I'm sorry, I didn't get the representative for the downtown.
Lori Boyer.
Yeah, and I was speaking also with the Ambassador Rue on his development plans and all. And what we wanted to do, and which I acquiesced on a lot of the things that the city of Jacksonville does, because I had explained to an agent for Mr. Musa back when he was involved in this, that the poor man need a place to stay. Y'all have taken some of this funding and incorporated it and concentrated on the river, wherein you had a place to, that there's no affordable housing for these people sleeping on the street. And that's the issue. All of the aesthetic stuff that you want to put on the river. And by the way, I feel a little old because I built the landing. I'm a retired plumber steam fitter. And so I'm looking at this situation, and it's so sad to see that our efforts should be first on entertaining and taking care of the poor first. If not, all this that we're talking about is Max Nix. Yes.
Good, and those were a lot of comments, but all really good. In general, like, it will be very important to think through the homeless situation generally, right?
Right.
Because you want to approach it from the most humanistic point of view, and it helps people living on the streets, people wanting to use the streets for other things. So, will be incorporated in any planning that needs to happen.
And I'm sorry, we got somebody else speak, but Mr. Joseph was here. We got a park downtown, just a block over to, and it's not people friendly anymore. The aesthetics is gone. There's no place for lonesome, prestige. There's no place to take it easy, and relax. It's not people friendly, and I hope that this development is people friendly as a concern.
Absolutely. So that's indeed the goal, and we can talk more in German on that.
Well, good evening. I'm Alan Bliss. The elements of the toolbox are fascinating. Many of them seem innovative, and the team has really done a commendable job of presenting all of them in a way that is refreshingly coherent and organized and comprehensible. And as a result, that's all stimulating. The common element is that they are all upland features and all shore-based activations. And any boater understands that the hydrodynamics of this section of the St. Johns River are challenging for navigation and waterborne enjoyment of the river. It's ironic, is it not? Because we are talking about the activation of a riverfront, and the river is the missing element in the elements of the toolbox. So I can see from your reaction that this is not a dazzling insight to you, but I'd be interested in hearing, to what extent have you tried to grapple with that? And given all the rest of the innovative elements that you've deployed, have you wrestled with or conjured with any innovative approaches to that? If
Yeah, and
you
actually,
have wrestled with it, you are not the first ones, but please share.
I will bounce it over to Claire and David, but there's only so many things that fit on the slide. So we did not ignore this, and David and Claire can tell you a bit more about it.
Well, I think I'll just start out with, okay, the St. Johns River is not only really interesting from a tidal point of view, but it's pretty hard. It has pretty hard. So it's fast and complicated. And we had wonderful meetings with some of the people doing some marine modeling. The creeks are such a huge opportunity for Jacksonville from the point of view of having some of that quiet water or some of that intertidal and estuary that's so important. That's a start of returning the river to actually having a better ecological footprint. And, you know, there are many people in the room that, or even online, that have working very hard at, you know, bringing the creeks back. And I think they're critical to the riverfront. And we didn't mention, even though they're on maps, we haven't mentioned enough that one of the things that's really unique about the rivers is those two creeks and that opportunity for a creek hitting the river. What I would say though is that there is a lot of potential for slowing down the river, for doing some protected floating stuff, for more public marina, for more fishing. It just, from a activation, near-term activation, that requires more permitting, more care. But there's you saw those swimming, you probably ignored the floating swimming pools and stuff, but that Jacksonville has the potential. Look, there's plenty of floating barges. There's all sorts of different kinds of ways to float things and protect them. That could be so exciting here. And again, I think we already spoke for long enough, but I would not want to ignore the potential of the river itself to be the protagonist in even a literal way. Like, I'm going out on the river to work on my resume, you know, like literally, and the potential of the water taxis and that connection with the creek and new piers and new kind of overlook. So I think that's just, I hate to end the evening without saying, just because there are some technical challenges, those in many cities, those challenges have been overcome.
I think we have one more comment here. It would be a very flowy resume. Claire.
Hi, my name is Jim Schwartz, and first I just want to thank the Jessie DuPont Fund for taking the leadership on this process. I don't think we would be anywhere near this without what you've done, so thank you. Then to tie into Mr. Bliss's comment, I'll go to you. We'll go back to the German thing in a second. I don't know if any of you have been to Munich, the English Garden.
I have, actually.
So I'm thinking of the surfing wave that's in the middle of this garden in Munich. And if we could figure out how to do a surfing wave as part of this park, it would just blow people's mind.
I love that,
So
yes.
it would really be exciting. So my question though is, one of the challenges I understand that Jacksonville downtown has in terms of being successful downtown is we're big, like we're something like 3.9 square miles, where most of our kind of competitive cities are less than 2 miles. And I'm wondering, I'm sure you've thought of this, but if you could talk to a little bit, how can the contiguous park that you're talking about kind of tie together these various bits of the city and kind of this very spread out bit of the city?
David, I will take the activation side and you will take the design side, okay? Good, so on the activation side, we feel very important to offer programs very similar or even the same programs in different spots along the river, so that you don't have a program for a community, but you offer the program for all the communities that could be getting to the riverfront. So continuity, consistency, and a logic of fun and functionality on that program side. On the design side.
Yeah, so I mean, on the design side, I think it ultimately just comes down to connectivity and sort of larger scale open space planning and thinking. And I think that the fact that we came into this process with the Emerald Trail Network having already kind of undergone a series of plans and evolution, and hired great partner landscape architects to kind of really envision how that network can stretch into the neighborhoods, it's kind of a critical first step. I think if you think about places where connective connective, people-oriented greenways are really armatures for public space that run throughout the city like Minneapolis. It's going to take some additional work to get there, and whether that's looking at rails to trails opportunities, looking at creeks that actually kind of go all the way up through the ecological corridors in the area, or even just thinking about multiple sort of modalities of connection, whether that be over water on a water taxi, or sort of by connecting specific points along the water, or even creating more kind of opportunities for connecting downtown to some of the great ecological reserves. I think all three of those things are going to be critical to creating that kind of cohesive network. I mean, realistically, I think a lot of what we think as the maybe not quite low-hanging fruit, but hopefully achievable low-hanging fruit is creating that connectivity within the downtown, and then using that as a kind of successful case study to launch further sort of regional open space thinking.
I think the surveyor with Van Blue hats, yeah.
Me. Like my father, I don't speak German though, so don't worry about me. I recently moved back home to Jacksonville from the New Jersey, New York area. And so a lot of places that you're showing is kind of, I've been through them, from going to Boston, Philly, all over the place. So it was kind of interesting seeing those places that I've actually visited. And, but I love what Jacksonville is doing now, and I see the growth, I see the potential. And I'm recently opening a business in Riverside. And so my question is, if I anticipate success, so how can a small business like myself be included in the expansion and trying to take advantage of this potential that I see? So what is the plan for growth or including small businesses? Because we know larger businesses will come into town. What is our plan for us local small businesses? And then my last question is, how can a person like myself partner with you guys and work with you guys to bring ideas, inputs, and some of the things that I see? I would love to do that.
Okay, good. So in terms of the partnering on the business side, so it would be great not to partner just on the programmatic side, but also definitely on a business side, right? And it will be a process to figure out what are all the right businesses, existing businesses, but also how can a plan like this stimulate new business will be really interesting. So I'm glad you spoke up, and I think that should be a starting point. Claire.
Well, I'm going back to some of the comments on, just activities and businesses people want to see downtown. And I'm betting that the kind of business you've started and the fans you have, they would love to come into the parks, whether it's, the pop-up food or even for you to be that Jacksonville businesses, artists, producers are kind of part of the branding that can happen in an activation plan that bluntly is hard on a permanent plan. But in a way, by getting in there first with creating the ideas as part of all these opportunities, it feels like that's what's going to actually inspire, a real discussion about the kind of development. And, Yuxiang talked about all of these funders for equitable development. Well, they come in when there's real character and quality there. And so I think that's actually the opportunity of seeing many of the entrepreneurs who are already producing exciting things as sort of as a cultural project. Because I did want to use David's line at the end that what's exciting about this, the Jacksonville Riverfront project, is that it kind of positions the riverfront downtown to be like a outdoor museum, a larger cultural venue in that big sense. And I think that's what, to me, is a natural kind of branding opportunity that is win-win for both, because then that's, people are coming down for you, and they're coming down for the experience.
So I'm definitely running out of steam. You probably are also. This is a long evening and really appreciate your time. What I think we should do is wrap up. What you see here on the slides is the link to the Jessie's website with some of these great resources, and more will be added in the coming weeks. This presentation will end up on there at some point in the coming days, week also, and we'll be issuing our final reports in the coming weeks. So that needs a little bit of time. We're still packaging everything. So we wanted to be sure to have seen you and heard some of your comments. From my side, a big thank you, but I know Mario also wants to wrap up.
I won't keep you. Thank you so much. We're still going out to neighborhoods. We rely on each one of you to become the, I won't say viral, the little seeds that go out in the community and talk about this and get other people engaged and excited, because we are, we went through this process, we supported this process, but we're, one of many stakeholders. When you citizens get together and say, we want this, that's when things will happen. So please go out there, plant the seeds, get your neighbors and families and friends excited. Thanks a lot.